March the 8th, 2022 meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, now in the hands of our capable city clerk, Ms. Lisa Lambert.
This is the pre-meeting of the Mobile City Council, Tuesday, March the 8th. You have approval of minutes from March the 2nd.
Good.
Appeals, we have requests for waiver of the noise ordinance on March 26th from 7 p.m. until 11 p.m. on Sprinkle Avenue. This is at the Frank Mitchell, normally put out at 10:30.
Yeah.
Request of O'Daly's Irish Pub, and this is on March the 11th and 12th, 6 p.m. until 12 a.m. We have appeal of the Plan Commission's approval of a PUD to allow multiple buildings on a single building site at 1867 Bridget Avenue.
Yeah, so, this is something, I already have met with the residents in that community. This has been approved in 2016, 2020. They definitely have some concerns, and I definitely understand their concerns, but today we're gonna definitely be looking at the appeal process that the planning commission already approved. So that's what we're focused on today. It is a public hearing, so we will have opportunity to listen to the residents, and anyone else is for it or against it at this time. But just, I am open and listening to all concerns today. But we will be voting if basically if the planning commission did anything that went against the policies and procedures.
Mr. Penn, are you expecting a lot of your constituents to come back?
Yeah, I'm expecting that we will have a nice turnout, with people who have concerns. I have met with them, probably about three times already with people who definitely have some concerns, and I truly understand that that's an area that I'm very familiar with. I walked that area my whole life as a kid, going in that community, so I understand their concerns. There's some things that I would like to suggest, but again, we know that this meeting is not for my personal beliefs. It's more from, did the planning commission do anything against any procedure and policy in place? And so, but I'm willing to listen, and hopefully you all do the same thing, listen, and then we'll make a decision.
Mr. Archie, would we have to vote on this today, or this will just stay open one week, or?
You don't have to vote on it, but definitely need to have the hearing today, but vote, I guess, could be held over if you want to.
We'll just call Mr. Penn and leave.
Okay.
Mr. President,
Mr. Jones.
if I could suggest that at the beginning of this conversation, before speakers start, that it's clear to them that we're not voting up or down on this PUD, that we're voting on the appeals as
Yeah.
you know, Mr. Penn stated, that, you know, this is not up for debate again. It's did the planning commission do their job is what is in front of us today. So it's two different things, I think, and I think they're gonna come with the expectation that we can vote up or down on the PUD itself, and that's not what we're looking at today. So there may be some confusion that I think needs to be cleared up before they start making their comments.
Mr. President,
Mr. Penn, then Ms. Gregory.
so I did ask Chris to kind of explain everything. I think it's important because sometimes people don't understand what's exactly taking place. And so, before we get started, I would love for our attorney to kind of explain the process.
Ms. Gregory.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was gonna say too, just explain that this is an appeal, and then what happens, how the council votes. If we vote one way, it upholds the appeal. If we vote one way, it denies the appeal. If we uphold the appeal, then what's the process? So that would be something going forward. But Chris can explain all of that prior to, us getting into it.
Yeah, a couple of the residents have reached out to me, so that's the reason I asked the question. Okay. Anybody else? Madam Clerk?
Public hearings, this is a public hearing to rezone property located at 1451 Cedar Crescent Drive from R3 to R3 to remove conditions of the existing zoning amendment.
Could we get just notice this going from R3 to R3, and I understand it's removing some of the conditions, but what are the conditions that's being removed? I mean,
I can tell you. They got this place rezoned in 1970, and at the time, Cedar Crescent.
Yes.
And at the time, they were planning to have 450 to 500 mobile home lots. All it'll really hold is 133. Right now, there's 129 filled lots and 4 empty spots. And at the time in 1970, a storm fence was required around the entire property and a 30-foot buffer zone. The fence wasn't built to requirements and has been torn up by hurricanes over the years. Anyway, so this is going to get rid of the entire property being fenced requirement and just require an 8-foot privacy fence on the east line. And I don't know what that backs up to. A storm fence, which is basically chain link on all the other lines except the south line, and a vegetative buffer, and would also limit the amount of mobile homes that would be there to 133.
Thank you also. You have anything different?
No, sir.
So, why are they going through the process of this?
Because any conditions placed on the rezoning amendment to change those conditions requires the whole process to be revisited.
So pretty much it's not going to add no more mobile homes, correct?
It'll actually do the opposite in that it is reducing the maximum number allowed. The previous plan allowed
400.
yes, several hundred. Now with this condition as proposed before you now, it limits it to 133.
Just one thing, I know this is not my district, but this one's the planning commission, I believe, I watched that hearing.
Yes.
And so is this all the things that were agreed to in the planning
Yes.
commission?
All right, thank you.
Public hearing to rezone property located at the southwest corner of Ziegler Boulevard and North University Boulevard from R1 to B2.
Ms. Berger?
Yeah, this is, a corner that is Ziegler and University, and of course you know that the University is a heavily trafficked major corridor. Ziegler is under process of being widened right now. The, property developers are proposing to, of course, rezone this to B2. Their intent is to build a gas station with a convenience store. There is a gas station and convenience store across University from this corner right now. Prior to the planning commission laid this over to give us an opportunity to hold a public meeting, which we did. Residents from nearby neighborhoods were invited, those that we felt had the greatest impact. So we didn't go all the way through each neighborhood that was close by, but we hit about half of each neighborhood. Imperial Woods, Park Forest, and Alpine Hills are 3 neighborhoods that are close by. There are also 3 churches that are close by to this. One in particular backs right up to it. That is Emmanuel Baptist Church. So at the meeting, we had a lot of representatives from Emmanuel Baptist Church, and then we had some residents sprinkled from the other neighborhoods. The main questions outside of the concerns from the church were traffic, noise, crime, do we get into the gas station, those sorts of things. The church had some issues with buffering, also with some lighting issues, noise issues, that kind of thing, also where the dumpster would have to be placed. So in the meantime, members of the church got together with the real estate developers and they worked out some concessions. I think they were probably discussed during the planning commission. That's where we are right now. We have gotten some emails from some of the residents, I think primarily in the Imperial Woods neighborhood. There are some, there is a petition, looks like 12 families signed the petition. And again, their main concerns are what I talked about, which is traffic, noise, crime. And do we need another convenience store, gas station, that sort of a thing. But when you look at this, this is University Boulevard, and it is a major traffic commercial corridor. There is a gas station convenience store directly across the street that's been there for years. If you head north on University, you come to neighborhood Walmart, strip shopping centers, 2 gas stations, I understand the concerns, the planning commission did approve this, but I expect we will have some people here today to talk in opposition of the real estate developer is also here, and he is happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Council?
Just a comment, Mr. President. This is also on the ordinance 64-011. So if we have any issues, then we can discuss at that time after they come and make their arguments. But we'll actually vote on this next week.
Yeah, this is just a public hearing today.
Yes.
Anyone else? Madam Clerk?
Public hearing to declare the structure at 256 Clay Street, 1162 Congress Street, 106 Michael Donald Avenue, and 67 St. Michael Street public nuisances and ordering them demolished.
Good, Ms. Carter.
We keep losing structures in the campground left and right daily with no incentive or no want of neighborhood revitalization. With no want or no order or no direction on neighborhood revitalization. Yet we hold in our coffers $67 million of funds that are unencumbered, and we continue to lose our neighborhoods. Just about this one.
Anyone else? Madam Clerk?
Presentation of petitions and other communications to the council, Nigel Hill regarding gun violence, Elizabeth Tipple, urban camping ordinance, Susan Como, urban camping ordinance, Hank Cadell, urban camping ordinance, Trevor Woolbridge, redistricting, Reverend Marvin Lou, redistricting and community safety, Reverend Jim Flowers, redistricting, Michael Morrison, redistricting, Reggie Hill, community meeting recommendations and fiscal decision making. Ordinance is held over, 39003, ordinance regarding urban camping and improper use of public places.
Yeah, Mr. President, since we had the committee meeting last week and throughout this entire discussion, there's been some questions raised by council members that I think are left unanswered at this point. Those primarily being, where do folks go when they're removed from the side of the road? What is the true bed capacity for all locations, all providers throughout the city? How many true service providers are there, not just within the continuum of care, but all the various nonprofits that help with combating homelessness? And then, of course, the one that's very big and maybe not fully in our control, but inadequate mental health treatment facilities. With all that said, those are legitimate questions that clearly are concerning to this council, and we need to try to get some answers to that, so we can ensure that when this ordinance is reintroduced or pulled from the table, I would request that we table it today. But knowing full well that it will be removed from the table when we get some answers to some of these questions, so that we can get it done for the citizens of the city. So today I'll ask that we table this, and then I will introduce a resolution in the coming weeks to try to ensure that we get the answers to these questions, so this doesn't just fall by the wayside, that we continue to push forward these answers to the front, and hopefully get us to a yes vote all around.
Anything else from the council?
Mr. President,
Mr. Jones?
I'd like to thank Councilman Reynolds for bringing this to the table. The discussions, and more importantly, the action by the administration and the other volunteers, and the discussion that we've had over the last month is very much needed. To echo what Ben has said, with tabling this doesn't need to end because this is tabled. We need to continue to have these discussions. I would ask the administration, like we did last week at the committee meeting, we need to put another one on the calendar in a month or no longer than a quarter and get updates on where we are. I think there is a need for this ordinance, but we've got to be able to check the blocks with those things that need to be done. So at least for me, I know that we've done everything in our power to provide the services required for those to transition back into society. We're not there yet. I think we can be. I think we're on the right path because of the discussions that have been had. So thank you, Councilman Reynolds, for bringing this to our attention to have this discussion. And by all means, let's make sure that just because we're tabling this doesn't stop the discussion. Let's keep it going. Thank you.
Any other council members?
Yeah,
Mr.
just
Burger?
briefly, and I echo what Scott said. Even though we are not ready to move forward on this particular ordinance that Ben had proposed and Joel, I think it was good that we had these discussions. It obviously shows that there is a need, and we need to stay on top of it. So we will continue to look at it and find out what we can do going forward, where the needs are, how the city can be involved, where should we be involved, all those kinds of questions that need to be answered. So the discussion has been good, it has been fruitful, we've certainly learned a lot, and we know that we need to do a lot more citywide to work on this problem. So thank you, Ben, for doing this, and we will just, if you want to keep it in public safety or something else, then we'll work on that and try to have periodic updates.
Any other council members? Madam Clerk?
Consent resolutions held over 40033, declare the structure at 456 Elmwood Drive, public nuisance in order to demolish.
Mr. Doctor, yeah.
Mr. President, just a brief update. This was held over to give the owners more time to clean up the ownership issues. It's air property with multiple individuals. Last time this was before council, approximately 60 days ago. The owner's representative, I believe was an attorney, was in the process of clearing this up. He probably will appear today at 10:30. He's requesting more time. However, municipal enforcement would like council to go forward and declare the property a public nuisance. The property has not changed. It still has problems with the roof, hole in the roof, and the carport is actually collapsing, pulling away from the structure and collapsing. So there's been no repairs made to date. No permits issued, no on-site activity. But the attorneys that's representing the owner is going to request more time. I have no problem on the back end if it's declared to stay any further action for another 30 to 60 days, assuming he can clear this up and transfer the sale to a new purchaser, which I believe he's identified as Mr. Irby, to repair the structure.
You're going to say something about that?
Yes.
Question of the council? Scott?
My only comment is this is really Joel's district, so I would request that we hold this over at least 1 week to allow Joel to come back and give us a recommendation since it's his district.
Maybe you talk to Joel by any chance?
I have not. However, we are so close to the 120 days that by the 15th of this month, we'll have to start over with new applications. So if next Tuesday is I think it's real close.
That's Tuesday, it's the 15th.
Yeah.
So we could hold it over 1 week. We'd have to make a
So we
decision.
can hold it over 1 week.
It'll put us right at that 120 days, which will require me to start over with new notification.
So we'll have to do something one way or the other
Yes.
next week.
All right, thank you.
Resolutions held over 47169, essentially vacation of portions of Pearl Lions Hospital and Basil Streets.
Sheriff?
08200, approve item-based bid for class 3 rain suits. 08201, approve purchase order for fuel at various locations. 08202, approve purchase order for annual renewal of forensic software at Mobile Police Department.
Mr. President,
We're-
I'm not sure what this one is. Renewal of forensic software, extraction software, I think is what it says. Not sure what this is. There's nothing attached to the agenda about it.
It is, and,
I was just saying, there's a reason for it, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, without getting too far into it, it has to do with, the analytics of digital evidence. Be that a computer or an iPhone or an iPad, that it's the analytical software to analyze that type of digital evidence.
I think it'd be helpful for us to have, to bring at least me up to speed on all this. I just, a lot of it's sort of guarded in privacy and secrecy, and I'm sure there's a very good reason for all that. We're voting on it week after week as we're progressing to try to fight the crime in our city, and I appreciate that, but it's not always clear to me what I'm approving with this stuff. So, and I really would like to be brought up to speed on not just this extraction software, but sort of the whole thing.
So just about every crime today leaves a digital footprint, okay? And so you hear probably all the time on the news about the analytics of, like being able to analyze a cell phone to look at how it may pertain to evidence involving the case. And so the software that you're looking at allows us to do that.
I understand. And again, just reiterate that I appreciate that it does that. I'm sure it does many other things, and I just don't know what those things are. So I would like that to have some sort of discussion about it. Maybe it's in private, maybe it's an executive
It might
session,
best be,
or whatever, but I just hesitate to continue to cast a vote, as we're making these improvements and these renewals and everything. I don't really have the full picture to know what I'm voting on, what rights are we giving up or not.
Chief, is it okay that talk to Mr. Reynolds after this meeting to try to bring up the street some?
Sure.
And if any other council members, if you request the same thing, just let me know.
Yeah, just a quick comment though, Mr. President, is that we analyze no evidence, digital evidence, without a search warrant, okay? And so we're not running around just looking at people's phones. And so everything is done with a search warrant, whether we seize the phone, and then another search warrant to even look at the phone. So I just wanted to make that very clear.
Mr. President?
Mr. Jones?
If we can go back to 08-201, and I've talked to you before, if we could get some type of analytics in the next week or two on what these fuel prices are gonna do to our budget, some type of estimate, I'd like to see that.
We can get that.
I think this is significant at this point. We've seen almost a
Double.
We're working on that right now,
Okay.
and plan to have something the next day or so.
When you think of
And I'll
the
share it with you.
transportation services we provide throughout the city with, buses and police and firefighters, et cetera, the public works vehicles, there's gonna be a cost increase for sure. And I'm just like to get an idea. I know we're looking at allocating, general funds, so that would be nice to have in our back pocket, is looking at.
Generally speaking, we budgeted for an increase in the fuel prices, probably about a 50%, but not what we're seeing now, which is closer to 100%. So
More than that.
Thank you, appreciate it.
21203, authorized contract with Kimberly Horn and Associates for traffic engineering services on Shenango Road. 21204, authorized contract with Natalie Bonner as a cyber specialist. 60205, approved settlement agreement and release of claims. 60207, determine an appropriation to the Friends of Municipal Parks, serves a public purpose, and approve payment.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reynolds?
we talked about this last week and held it over in order to get some specifics on the contract, and that has been done to make sure that everything that this money is used for is specifically for capital improvements. I want to thank Chris and also Ben for working on some language for that. I think it just is exactly where it needs to be. I've talked with Cliff Kennedy, who is the head of the Friends group out there, and he is good with the contract. He should be here at 10:30. Also, going forward, I know Ben has mentioned this, and we all have parks. We need to look at some sort of a template for these public-private partnerships, whether it's a park or another organization, on how we work with them, how we better utilize what the private groups want to do to help the city in various improvements and projects. So I think this is a great way to get started. And so just again, thank you both for doing that.
we need to, on that resolution, it got tweaked a little bit to account for the contract we put together, so we need to amend it to adopt the current version.
So we amend, okay, one more time.
So when this comes up, just ask for an amendment to utilize the current version that we put on notice.
Okay, so we go back and then approve as amended?
Right.
Okay.
Ordinance is being introduced, 64010, Mr. Rezoning on Cedar Crescent Drive from R3 to R3. 60011, so rezoning on Ziegler Boulevard from R1 to D2. 88012, ordinance authorizing acquisition of real property, lots 1 and 2, municipal park for Moss.
Carol, has a question.
On the laws,
I got it.
property.
Yeah, this is really just although it's a purchase, it's really a long story on how the Moss property was there at Municipal Park when it was, back when it was the water board. And right now, we're getting the property, splitting it from, acquiring it from Moss, and then there's actually 2 parcels. One will come to the city, and one will be then deeded back to Moss, and then they'll sell that parcel. But it's really getting it back into the park and becoming part of Municipal Park. It was just non-utilized property by Moss that they had from way back when we split up the property between the city and Moss. So it's just regaining that portion of the property.
This has all been approved by Moss as well?
Yes.
So they're-
Yeah. It's been about a year in the process to get to this point finally.
And this actually goes back to like the 50s, doesn't it?
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, used to be city property,
right.
Yeah.
and then it was conveyed to Moss, and Moss is giving it back. So,
Good, Ms. Carol.
Just a question.
Consent resolutions being introduced, 40, 208, 209, 210, 211 are declaring the structures public nuisances and ordering them demolished. 58, 212, assess cost for removal of weeds, weed being moved 1650. 60, 213, 214, 215, approval of award of special bonus to the Parks and Recreation Employee of the
Joe.
Month.
are they gonna be here?
For the Public Works at-large Employee of the Month, Public Services Employee of the Month. 60216, amend Resolution 6953, 2021 to determine certain expenditures served for public purpose and approving payment.
Just as a way of explanation, this is really just an amendment to something that we passed some time ago. We wanted, well, the neighbors wanted to amend the change of scope, so they're increasing what they're gonna be using the money for. At first, it was just for maintenance of the parkway, and they have included it now to include maintenance of an entrance island right off Moffett Road and Magnolia Grove Parkway. So we're just increasing the scope of work for the money.
37223, recommend approval to the ABC Board for issuance of a special events retail liquor license for Lit Cigar Lounge for Saturdays at the Coop. Resolutions being introduced, 01217, authorized agreement with Alta Point Health Systems for evaluation work for the fiscal year 21 collaborative crisis response training program grant, $31,500.
Mr. President.
Rooms.
All right, this one, what is the Collaborative Crisis Response Training Program grant?
So that grant deals with mental illness, focusing on making sure that there's collaboration between police and the mental health facilities to provide training to law enforcement officers as it relates to mental health, and working on developing co-response between police and social services.
All right, and this is a grant? Is
For-
this a-
That provides for
it's
the
great.
training.
Okay, so we're paying $31,000 to Alta Point to train our officers.
No, that is, the 31,000 is coming to us for training.
Oh, okay, I got you. Understood.
So is Alta Point going to conduct that training?
I think it's USA, wasn't
Alta Point actually conducts the training. Dr. Gibson facilitates the training.
Is there any way we can incorporate some of these nonprofits that deal with homeless into this training? Because I think that would be extremely useful for some of those to understand, because this is a big part of it. As we've learned, we've got a lot of mental health issues on the streets, and if they're doing a collaborative crisis response team, I think we've seen that exists in that society as well. And we've got some nonprofits that deal with that, and if we've got training that's going to be made available, then that might be useful for them as well. Just asking a question.
I don't know the answer to that right now, but I can look into it.
I think what Scott may be saying is, for example, when there is someone who's, say, on private property, and an officer, this may go to this, an officer, say, approaches them for some trespassing on private property and they're camping, or whatever. This training is designed to equip them with the ability to deal with it appropriately, how to interact with them, is that?
Correct.
It's to like, we may get the call as a disorderly conduct, and it's so the officer can recognize that he's dealing with somebody that's mentally challenged. And I believe they're setting up a triage center, right?
Correct. So this is part of a greater grant that the governor introduced probably a year ago, where actually Alta Point has set up a facility over near University Hospital where the officers can actually take the individual in lieu of arresting the individual, to have them triaged and have some immediate services provided without making the arrest of the individual. So this is an ongoing collaborative that we've had with Alta Point for over a year and a half.
So the triage facility is already stood up?
It's already stood up.
It's already in operation
Correct.
right now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, the more I hear, the more I think that would be, those nonprofits definitely could have a use for this type of training. Because, I mean, these folks show up on their doorstep all the time. If they're able to make some assessments, through this training that they have, and then work with the police collectively to get there, I think that would be a good thing. So, thanks, Chief.
01218, authorized renewal of Harborough and Associates doing business Harborough Engineers Constructors for Bienville Square fountain improvements and site amenities, $34,220. 08219, approved purchase order to Alabama Pipe and Supply for concrete medium barriers, $16,440. 21220, authorized contract with Alabama Power Company for service in telemetry, technology, deployment, networking, and software not to exceed $525,574.20.
Mr. President, this is a big line, this is a big approval for us here. This is, based on my reading of the contract that was put forward, essentially installing cameras throughout the city. And it's not always clear who gets to make the decision, where the cameras go, who we're able to track, all that sort of stuff. And Alabama Power is going to be supplying the cameras. It appears we're going to be paying them to supply the cameras and put them up. And I assume they're going to put them up wherever the government wants them put up, according to the contract. I think it's important from the people's perspective that we have a say, even in privacy, to determine where they're going, and make sure that they're installed in areas permitted by law, and that, according to this contract, they must be installed where persons have no reasonable expectation of privacy. That's a broad term, and I think the people ought to be able to help determine that in some form or fashion. So I suggest that we have some board or some sort of, committee that can work in collaboration to represent the people's privacy views on this, so that when a new camera, say, is to be installed somewhere, so they want it at an intersection somewhere, that before the government can put that camera in place, it needs to go before this committee in an executive session type setting, and they have an input to say, yes, this is a place where someone would have no reasonable expectation of privacy or, you know, whatever else their criteria is. So I would say that we should consider that before we move this thing forward.
This camera system, is the second component to the shot detection system, okay? So you've got the shot spotter itself, which detects gunfire. This camera system will pan towards that gunfire. So it's not throughout the city, but rather data-driven on specific locations to where there's an extraordinary amount of gunfire being reported in order for us to detect it, and also be able to have actionable intelligence that we're looking for two people armed with these guns they got in this car. And so, whereas without the camera system, we're just responding to shots fired with no idea what we're looking for when we get there. Oftentimes to the very location where the shooter no longer is.
Councilman Reynolds, if you'll keep in mind, as part of the presentation that we gave to the Public Safety Committee meeting, that was part of that presentation as a greater broad view of Project Echo Stop. And so this camera system will be tied to the technology, as Chief Barber just mentioned. And so I kind of gave you guys a general overview during the Public Safety Committee meeting of where this system will be used at, without specifically saying which areas it would be used in.
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad ask. I think that's important, right? The Echo Stop really is ineffective without
Right.
cameras being deployed. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be deployed. I am saying that where they're deployed and how they're utilized and determining where they go, if there is no reasonable expectation of privacy, and there's probably a whole slew, but this is first time I've seen it, it was, you know, this past week, so I haven't been able to really dive into it head first. I'm just saying that, yes, we should have the cameras as a component, but also people's privacy and the people's voice should be included in that process, so that I'm not concerned that you guys are gonna be out there breaking laws and looking at people, but there's nothing to ensure the proper oversight with all this without some sort of intervention or some board, or that would be made up of maybe retired judges, or, you know, somebody who's got a legal perspective on it all. So that's what I would say at this point, not having fully got into it all the way, but there should be adequate protection in place when we start putting surveillance all over the city. Now, sonar and where a gunshot comes from, that's one thing, right? That's been around since the Vietnam War. But when we're talking about capturing video and tracking and all that sort of stuff, well, location, I mean, this is a fickle thing that we have to strike the right balance on.
Just one question I have, Mr. President. Looking at the contract, Alabama Power would retain ownership of these cameras afterwards. Why is that? And why would the city retain ownership if the city's the one providing the funds to purchase?
Because it's their cameras. It's going to be, so Alabama, the reason that this is Alabama Power is because they already have certain cameras, and the integration is that much simpler. And then two, and this is to Councilman Reynolds' point, you've got, it's their cameras, we're leasing, there's a maintenance issue, so we don't have to pay for any of that. That's the integration part of it. But Councilman Reynolds makes a valid point, in the reason that the contract specifically states that you've got nowhere where we'll put these cameras where anybody has a reasonable expectation of privacy. Well, that's inside your home, or that's inside your car, but any public place.
Behind a privacy fence.
Right, anywhere, not like that. We can't put them on private property. We are not allowed to put them in somebody's home or in somebody's car, but they can be put, you know, anywhere where you could view somebody doing something for the public. I mean, there are a number of constitutional cases that spread that out and understand, or point those specific points out and make it clear. And so that's why that language is in there. It's, you know, you have a reasonable expectation of privacy. Say, for instance, you got this camera going right here, right now in a public meeting, no reasonable expectation of privacy. Same thing out on the street. And so somebody firing a gun, especially committing a crime, has no reasonable expectation of privacy. And then we can use this information against them. If it was inside their home, you couldn't do that. And so there are a number of barriers and constitutional protections, especially when you go to a criminal proceeding, that are gonna protect even the guilty. I mean, so that's why that language is in there. But to your point of asking that question, these are their cameras, we're leasing, they're taking care of the maintenance, we're just integrating, and that way, it's not that we're spending $500,000 every year to implement a program like this.
How long is the lease?
So no, it's,
It's actually a 4-year lease. It's a 4-year lease.
that's right.
4-year lease.
Life of the ARP, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so my question is, how are they paying for cameras?
I'm sorry?
How are they paying for cameras?
How's, who paying for the,
The $524,000, what does it pay for?
The install, the cameras, the maintenance, the upgrades, I mean, it's a contract.
They pay for the cameras themselves.
The install.
Yeah,
is part-
it pays
in
for
part.
it pays for the, it pays for the cameras,
Themselves,
it
right?
pays for
In
the
part,
cameras, and the install of the cameras, and the maintenance of the cameras.
So the ARP money belongs to the city, correct?
When you say, but yeah, of course, it's,
All right,
it's
so
the city.
if the ARP money belongs to the city, and the ARP money is paying for cameras, then the city owns the cameras. So are we giving the cameras to Alabama Power?
It's a lease agreement,
So we're
lease.
leasing them to Alabama Power, and they're not leasing them to us.
leasing them from Alabama Power.
So, but we're paying for the cameras with our money, and we're leasing them from the same time, that's what I just heard.
No, some of these cameras are already in place. And so if you all would let us get you the information, because the back and forth of trying to explain to you in a small amount of time, the intricacies of this is probably not the best use of you all's time, but we can give you the information.
The other thing about placement of cameras means at heights that you can see into backyards, windows, things like that.
There,
So keep in mind that when.
So that's beyond a reasonable idea of privacy, you know?
And, well, see, that's why we don't need to get into these conversations here.
I mean, I was gonna ask later, but everybody else started. I've got 30 questions right here that I want to ask that pertain to this. Now, I can send them in a written form, or we can ask right now and talk them out.
Well, to answer your question, so no. So anything you can see from a street, say for instance, I give you a good example. We have municipal enforcement officers, and everybody's pretty familiar with this. Municipal enforcement officer goes in and they see that you got trash in your yard, overgrown, weeds, they can see into your yard, then so be it, they can take action. Anything that an officer can see in plain sight, if you can see that in plain sight, we can take action. So the camera's not doing anything that you wouldn't have a person doing, whether it's elevated or not.
An officer can't see over 6 foot privacy fence.
Right.
Either to the next door neighbor. So that's still, there's a reasonable loss of privacy with the cameras, all I'm saying, today.
What you're dealing with is either we're going to have a shot spotter situation where somebody, you see, that person shooting a gun in a criminal act has no reasonable expectation of privacy. They don't. The minute they do that, they lose it. That's the point. And so the camera turns toward, camera turns toward the shot and starts to record so the officers can respond. So you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy to commit a crime.
the cameras are not monitored.
Right. And they're not picking up people's voices and people talking either.
Unless you talk at the decibel of a gunshot.
Well, all right.
I'll still let it run.
I'm not so much concerned with ShotSpotter. ShotSpotter appears to be, the need needs to be coupled with the cameras, right? Shot happens, camera pans over. But at least on my reading of the contract as it sits now, very early on, what if somebody were to be suspected of a crime that this camera could see into their backyard, whatever it was, and the police department decided, we suspect there's a crime committed, not gun related, suspect there's a crime committed, let's reach out to Alabama Power, which gives us the right to, in the contract, reach out to Alabama Power, or use our digital connection with them to log in and see if there's a crime being committed or something other than gunshots.
You have to get a warrant for that.
Not if your understanding, if the government's understanding is that there's no reasonable expectation of privacy. The government's understanding is
Public
that
place.
in this public place where this camera is located, there's no reasonable expectation.
In a
of
public
privacy.
place, that's right, but in a private place, you have to get a warrant. Public place, you don't.
I understand, but see, this is where the interpretation happens,
He's
right?
already said it's the proper place.
If
It's inadmissible.
the government thinks that it is not a protected area, and then say a defense attorney says, well, this is a protected area, you said yourself that there's been Supreme Court cases on it, because it's not as cut and dry and clear all the time that there is a reasonable expectation of privacy in this area, or there's not a reasonable expectation of privacy in there. And if we give all the authority to the government to make those decisions solely, then I think we run the risk of treading on some rights. Now, if there is a judicial system in this, I'm just saying that the people's view may be able to mitigate some of those legal proceedings by intervening before it even gets there to help determine the placement and the use of the cameras, so that we narrow it down to our purpose, which is for this use of gunshot detection, not everything else. Although it may be helpful for other things.
So I hear the what ifs, we do this, what if we do that, but I'm not aware of any case where ShotSpotter and the integration of camera system has been used to identify criminal activity other than what's associated with gunshots. And so at this point, I'm not aware of any cases where specifically where integrated camera systems with ShotSpotters has said, well, we witnessed a crime or we had information of a crime occurring in somebody's backyard, and they made the case solely based off that camera system. I think that in delaying or trying to really kind of hammer out, letting the people be involved in identifying where this camera system should be put, one, you divulge where the systems are. Two, you shift crime trends, because if people know where your defense is, they just create a new offense around what you're doing. The intent of this system, Project Echo Stop, is to help us reduce violent crime, and particularly gun violence, in our community. And so I think that, as we continue to talk about the system and the camera integration, I think that is, if we're able to talk about this offline a little bit better, we can show you a little bit more of where this system is, and I don't think it will infringe on anybody's rights unless they're committing the crime of discharging a weapon.
Mr. Hardy, does this warrant to have an executive session?
It's definitely a security procedure, so it could.
Chief, either one, would y'all be prepared for out the 10:30 meeting today, or that's not enough time?
No, well,
I would prefer that we wait, because I haven't even, I just, this week, I haven't really been able to dig into it.
This will go long somewhere further. And
This
just
is
to say, based on, if we were to use the whole hotspot system, I could pretty much tell you where you guys are trying to place cameras anyway. That kind of hurts a little bit too. You know what I mean?
well, do keep in mind that the police department, Mobile Police Department has deployed camera surveillance systems for 30 years in public places. So they are throughout the city. So all the concerns that you have already been addressed, and they have been used in a historical sense of backing them up to see when the crime occurred, to look at historical data. We also access a lot of neighborhood cameras that are put in by HOAs. And so I think we have, it's well over 12,000 live feeds in the city of Mobile under Project Shield. And so none of this is new to us. The Technology Center, the United States Attorney's Office, has a desk there. And main reason for that is because case law and statutory law, criminal procedure has not kept up with technology. And so your concerns are very much our concerns in making sure that we don't do anything. If you inadvertently capture something behind a privacy fence because of an elevated camera, it's inadmissible evidence in court. And we know that, and so we can't use it.
What's the deadline on allocating the funding, the ARP funds?
mean, this is the first read, y'all are fine in holding it over, we're not in that big a rush. I mean, we've got 4 years to spend the money, so, but due to Mr. Reynolds' point, this is a very integral part of the shot detection. Without it, there's a lot of negative contact with the police because we have no idea what we're looking for.
Just a technical question on this. Do the cameras run 24/7 and are they only activated when there is the echo or the sound?
We're only notified when there's a gunshot, and then the cameras pan, and then we're notified of where, and then you see these cyber specialists that'll be able to give the information, the intelligence to the officer that you're looking for, a shooter armed with this type of weapon that got into a blue Honda Accord. And so
But
that,
the cameras are on and they're just aimed low or something?
they're just pointed down the street.
Down the street?
Yeah.
It's like on Project Shield, they're all aimed at a certain down the street, they never move, they're just a, steady cam in the neighborhood. So I'm aware of all the Project Shield cameras, so I was just curious how the cameras rotate, it's just, they're aimed down the street, sound comes and then they turn.
That's when they'll move. That's correct.
But normally they are up high, correct?
That's correct.
Mr. President,
Mr. Jones?
I recommend that we work to set up an executive session to go into detail about this next couple of weeks.
Probably next week. Okay, we just start the conversation.
Yeah, I have to figure it out, but like Jimmy said, we've got a couple, 3 weeks maybe, because we're just trying to figure out what to do with an executive session when everybody's here.
Okay.
But this is very important, her to put out on our streets, because every day we hear about gunshots. Not first.
6221, approve settlement agreement and release of claims. Call for public hearings. 41222, call for public hearing to consider approval of a certificate of public convenience and necessity to July Enterprises doing business as Coastal Express Shuttle to operate a shuttle service scheduled March 22nd. Announcements.
Anything from the council?
Yeah,
Sheriff?
you guys know that today is March 8th. I didn't see him come in here today, I thought he was supposed to get in because Jim Ross's birthday. And with all the redistricting stuff going on, I think everybody would send him a text and tell him happy birthday.
Anything else?
Yeah. And beverage for Jim Ross today, y'all.
Yes, yes. Catch
Anything
these
else from the
filthy
council?
criminals.
Anything from administration?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I think the idea of the board is to have
Hey, how are you?
specialized knowledge on that subject. I mean,